here is, I think, the crux of his argument.
So here's the problem with trying to grant that kind of inviolability, that right to life to non-human animals. As things currently stand, and this might not be the case in principle, I'm not really sure, I wouldn't want to say either way, but certainly in practice, it is currently impossible, it's not possible to avoid killing animals in the production of food for human sustenance, right? Now, of course, we can eat plants, but do bear in mind that growing plants, all plant-based agriculture involves animal death, not just from pesticides and habitat destruction, but also like the effect of transporting food, the environmental costs, all of this kind of stuff. It involves a lot of animal deaths, is what I'm trying to say. Now, of course, the vegan response...
I already gave a disclaimer, right? But let's do that again. I have huge respect for Alex. I think he does great work. But yeah, he's wrong here. So let's give him a civilized sort of response, right? So Alex is right here, of course, that killing plants, not killing plants, growing crops, right? It causes a lot of animal death, right? But that's not all it causes, right? The production of plant-based food, right, is also responsible for the deaths of human beings, right? If you look at the stats from India, and if you're watching this on replay, there will be sources in the description box. In India alone, right, between 1995 to 2015, around 300,000 farmers died, right? 300,000 farmers died in the production of plant-based food by suicides. That is just the nature of food production in India. So I depend on a system, right, that causes human deaths, right? If I'm eating that food, I'm contributing to that system. So Alex is right that plant-based food causes animal deaths, but it also causes human deaths, right? And it's not just suicides. There are accidents, there are all that sort of stuff. Tractor accidents, some people get run over by the tractors, some people get kicked by wild animals, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's that. So Alex's case, as we'll see later, it says that, because we're killing animals, we can't say that they have a right to life, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to violate it. But humans have a right to life, and we're clearly violating it in the production of plant-based food. So that cannot be a distinction because deaths of both are involved here. Anyway, let's continue.
To this is to say that yes, growing plants is what I'm trying to say. Now, of course, the vegan response to this is to say that yes, growing plants kills some animals, but a lot more crops, a lot more plants are used to feed livestock than to feed human beings. So if we're trying to minimize the amount of animal suffering we're responsible for, we can either grow some crops, which does kill some animals, and then eat those crops, or grow even more crops, killing even more animals, to then feed those crops to livestock, to then kill those animals, to eat those animals. And it's clear which is going to contribute least to animal suffering and death. So here's the problem.
Okay, so that's one response, right? That is one response to give to someone who makes that argument. But there is definitely another response that you could provide, right? And that other response, right, is that it's about a matter of intention, right? When you're ordering plant-based food, you are not demanding that someone kills animals you're not demanding the death of animals. That is just an unfortunate consequence of the production. When you're ordering animal-based food, right, that is what you're demanding. You're demanding the death of other animals, right? You're demanding that a chicken be killed, or a goat be killed, or a cow be killed, so that you can eat their flesh. I think this is a very important distinction. And the way we can think about this is, think about this. Like, you're driving down the road, okay? And it happens ever so often. Like, I don't drive, so it hasn't happened with me. But it happens ever so often that a driver will hit a dog, hit a sort of animal on the road, and the animal dies, right? Do you think that there is a difference between that and seeing an animal in the distance, chasing that animal down with your car until you've hit that animal and killed that animal? Do you think there's a difference? I think there is a difference, and I think it has to be. And I think most people would agree with me on that one, and I think Alex would too. So I think he forgot about that part. I don't know, or maybe he thinks there is a reason to not include that response. I don't know, but yeah, I think that's why I disagree with him there. Now let's continue and see what he has to say next.
Think of human, which is going to contribute least to animal suffering and death. So here's the problem. Think of human rights, like the right to life in a human context. If the only way that I could get food in order to stop myself from starving was to go and kill another person, legally or morally, I don't think this can be justified. There might be some ethical theories, certainly like egoism, almost certainly would say so. But I think most people's, at least their ethical intuitions, would say that I don't get to go and murder somebody because it's the only way to feed me. Even if it means I starve, that doesn't mean I have the right to go and take someone else's life. Why? Well, potentially because they have this thing called the right to life. They have a right that I can't violate, even if it means that I'm going to starve to death. Let's say I need to like murder them to steal their food or something like that. This isn't something we think is justified. If we were to apply that right to life to non-human animals, then now consider the animals that are killed in crop production. We'd have to say the same kind of thing. We'd have to say, if the only way for me to eat is to kill all of these animals, then I just can't eat because they have a right to life that cannot be violated. They're not.
Okay, so I think that the analogy does not work there because, again, those deaths are accidental deaths. So if I think the analogy of killing your neighbor to steal their food is hunting, right? It's hunting an animal. And I think most people, most vegans, right? I think vegans in general would agree that hunting is immoral, and they would not really kill an animal for like for their food, right? So yeah, that it's not that, right? The difference is in the intention again. One is accidental death, the other is intention. The analogy to killing your neighbor is to intentionally go out and kill an animal, not to accidentally contribute to crop deaths.
Threatening me in any way or anything like this. I'm going over to them and killing them in order to produce food to feed myself. So if they have a right to life, it means I can't do that. What does that mean? It means humankind will starve because, as I say, as things currently stand, we can definitely minimize animal death and suffering by eating plants, but we can't eliminate it. We can't get rid of animal death in even just plant-based agriculture. So if they had this right to life in the same way that humans do, we'd be in big trouble. So you could just say that the non-human animal's right to life is a different kind of right to life to a human being. Maybe in a human context, I'm allowed to kill you only if you're threatening me, but in a non-human context, I'm allowed to kill you just if it's necessary for me to survive, or something like this. But if you're going to do that, then you're going to have to offer an analysis of rights that explains why one creature has this kind of right and one creature has this kind of right. And I think it also muddies the term right to life and makes it vague and essentially something that changes depending on who it applies to. The whole point of having this system of rights is that, for instance, in human rights, the idea is that if you're a human, you have this right. That's it. No questions asked. Simple as that. If you start saying, well, you get this right and you don't get this right, and you kind of get an adapted different kind of version of this right, the whole functional purpose of rights is thrown out the window anyway. So I don't really think it's probably a helpful thing to do to argue that animals have a right to life, certainly not in the way that humans do. I think it's better to say something like they have a right to avoid or to not have inflicted upon them unnecessary or wanton suffering. I think that's a much easier position to defend and would be consistent with our views regarding human beings. But to say that animals have a right to life, I'm not sure I can stand by that. But if you really...
Okay, so I think the problem here is that Alex is going backwards, right? He has sort of taken how we live in this world, and then he's like deciding on what rights should be. Because remember, we're not discussing what rights animals have, we're discussing what rights animals should have, right? And like he has taken like how the convenience of humans, like humans want this, and therefore the rights of animals has to sort of match up with that. I think that is the sort of wrong approach, because why should ethics be why should ethics and morality be like so human centered? Like maybe like he has studied philosophy, at Oxford, so maybe he knows something I don't, but I don't understand that why ethics has to be so human centered, that we have our certain condition and animals' rights has to match up with that, instead of just analyzing the properties of animals, of how much they suffer, of how much pain they can feel, and affording them rights on that basis. I don't understand this human centrism, and yeah, I don't get it. Maybe he knows something I don't.
Really do want to cling on to this idea that non-humans have a right to life in the same way that humans do. I think it's going to be a bit tricky, but you've got two options, maybe, that I can think of. One option is to treat human rights in exactly the same way. So you might say that my neighbor has a right to life, but one of the exceptions or one of the specified conditions of this is that if I'm starving, I'm able to go over to them and murder them in order to take their food and feed myself. That would be consistent with what we do to animals in crop production, where we kill.
No. What would be consistent with what we do to animals in what would be consistent with killing your neighbor to take their food is to go to a nearing animal, to kill them, and either to eat them or to take their food. That is analogous to killing your neighbor to take their food or to eat your neighbor. So yeah, I think Alex is making a disanalogy here.
Kill them in order to feed ourselves. But I think that's a tricky position to hold, that my neighbor can have a right to life, but one of the specifications of that right to life is that if I'm starving and the only way for me to eat would be to go and kill them, that I'm able to do that. So that's option one. The other option, of course, would be to become a Jain or a fruitarian or whatever it is they call them, the kind of people who just don't kill animals in any context. In its most extreme formulations, these are the kind of people who will stare at a tree and wait for the apple to fall off before eating it, because they can't yank it off, because that would be, I don't know, a violation to the tree or whatever it is they think. I wouldn't recommend this line of thought, ladies and gentlemen, because you will become malnourished. Being vegan and being a healthy vegan is perfectly possible, but it can be quite tricky, certainly depending on where you live. Trying to do it without being responsible for any animal death, including animal death in crop production, is completely unrealistic, and you will end up being malnourished and ill and probably dead. So I wouldn't recommend that one either. I'd probably go with the first option. Do you ride?
Okay, so just to wrap up here, yeah, Alex says that it is perfectly possible to be vegan, but to be vegan without being responsible for any animal deaths is impossible. Now that's true, but the problem is that he uses this to say that animals don't have a right to life, right? Should not have a right to life. But the thing is that it is not possible to live in this world without being the cause of human deaths and human exploitation. But that doesn't mean that humans don't have human rights and a right to life as a consequence. So yeah, I don't quite get his reasoning here. Alex also talked about Jains, and Jains are not fruitarians. Jains will consume dairy. So that's just another thing that's so interesting about the sort of Western perception of Eastern religions, right? They're seen as these peaceful religions that just don't do harm, I'm not sure if Alex is talking exactly in that sense, but that's how I see a lot of people view it. But Jains do consume dairy, and dairy, as we know, is far more exploitative, even more exploitative than meat. So, yeah, that's an interesting case. I thought it was worth mentioning.